Welcome to another episode of Show and Tell. My name is Ana Lorena Fabrega, and this is David PERELL, my partner and really good friend. So today we're going to be talking about the future of online education. This is a topic that people have asked us to kind of elaborate on, and especially that topic where we address the difference between online learning and then remote virtual learning, which is really what most students around the world are experiencing right now because of COVID-19. And hopefully, shed some light as to what seems to be working in the online space. So before we start, the most important part of the show, David, what is your show and tell for today?
Okay, so I brought my college diploma. And so I have been through traditional education. I did it all. This is my absolutely beautiful. I feel like we went to two of the prettiest schools in the country. Well, if you take SMU and not Elon. But this was Alamance, the building. And it's called Alamance because Elon's in Alamance County. And it had this beautiful American flag right in the middle. And then here we always had the state flag of North Carolina. And here we had the Elon flag. And Elon, one of the things that Elon did really, really wonderfully was just branding and just beauty. It was one of the prettiest places I've ever gotten to spend time. And then you can see down here, I studied media arts and entertainment. So I got a Bachelor of Arts.
How is your college diploma related to what we're going to be talking about today of the future of online learning?
I just have experience in an in-person class and now running a school. And I think that running my writing school is such a reaction to my frustrations with online or with in-person learning. And I think that there's so much room for improvement there. I don't know if there's anything really profound there.
No, but hey, I can totally see, especially since you've been very vocal about college.
It has to do with learning and education,
Right,
and that's
right.
enough,
You can always
okay?
find a way to
You know what?
relate
It's my
it.
college diploma on a show about education. I think it's enough
Fine.
similar, hopefully.
B minus, David. B minus. Just
B
kidding.
minus.
That was a good
Honestly,
explanation.
that's better than most of my grades in college, so thank you.
All right. So for my show and tell, since we're talking about, how this kind of remote online learning that we're experiencing now because of COVID-19 is not really online learning, I found that this is an example of what a guy called David Wiley describes as the Polo Parable. Have you heard of the Polo Parable?
No, but I feel like I've heard of David Wiley.
Okay, and I found this really interesting. So I decided that this is going to be my show and tell for today. I'm going to be sharing this parable that I found that relates to what we're talking about. So once upon a time, there was this university that was really known for excelling both in academics and in athletics. And they were particularly good in a sport called water polo. Have you heard of water polo? Of course, right? So their water polo team actually had won like all these conference competitions, and they were just really good at it. And then one day, the university athletic director approached the water polo coach. He was super excited. He was telling him about this new polo sport that had emerged, and that it was going to compete this year in the conference championships. But that this kind of polo was actually played, instead of in the water, in a horseback. And the athletics director was super excited because he thought that this could present like a really good opportunity for the athletic team, considering that they were so good at water polo, right? That's what they were known for. But the coach reaction was like, well, but we know nothing about horses. And the athletic director was like, well, it doesn't really matter. Like, it's still polo. All you need to do is focus on playing polo and winning, right? You have to score. You have to prevent the other team from scoring. You play defense or offense, and there's a ball. So at a very high level, they're both the same activity. It's still polo. And he said, you and your staff have been studying polo for decades. So all you need to know, you already know what's effective. You already know what isn't. And you already know how to motivate your team in order to win. So all you have to do is replicate this, right? Does that sound familiar?
Sounds like
So
school and remote learning.
Right. So teachers and schools, right? Just do what you've always done. Grab your lesson plans and teach them online. The techniques that you use in the classroom will serve you well online. Just trust that you know what you're doing and do what you've always done. So the moral of this parable is that trying to recreate schools online is like trying to turn a water polo team into a polo team. it won't really work, right? Because although they may seem like they're cut with the same knife, there are many things logistically that are not the same, right? So this is kind of an introduction to what we're talking today. And we can start by chatting about, the difference between online learning and remote learning. And I can kind of share how I see it, David. And of course, I see it from a teacher's perspective. Most of my best friends are all teachers. We're talking all the time. So I really know how this transition has been for teachers. And I've been trying to do this also with kids. So I'm going to share how I see it. And then, David, you can tell me what you think, right? So to me, online learning, when it's done effectively, involves a curriculum that was specifically designed for that purpose. So in other words, it's, using lessons in technology to conduct and create them and optimize them in a way that you have a virtual audience in mind, right? And that's very different from remote online learning, right? Remote online learning, which again, it's kind of like the way that many students are currently experiencing it right now, is largely a reactionary experience. So rather than creating lessons that are intended to be taught online, what many schools and institutions are trying to do is adapt the in-person and face-to-face courses that they've been teaching for, years, and just try to modify them, and then so that they can fit in a virtual space for a remote audience. And as I was sharing, with the Polo Parable, online learning is not about adjusting lessons to make them available online, but about designing the lessons and the class dynamics from scratch with this virtual audience in mind. How do you see it, David?
Yeah, you remind me of a quote from Henry Ford, who said, if I had asked customers what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. And I think that this happens in every single technological change, that people know what problems there are, but they don't know what the solutions are very well. And generally for the solutions, what they try to say is what we've always had, but better. But if we had just built faster horses, we would still be walking on the streets and they would still smell like poop and we would step in poop whenever we were walking through our cities. And it was really the car that then created something totally new that was a different way of seeing and thinking. And you see this everywhere, where even in the internet, when we started with original internet advertisements, there were companies like DoubleClick and AdMob, and they sold banner ads. And what banner ads are newspaper advertisements on the internet. They are ads that are next to the content. And it wasn't until Facebook and other social media platforms that we had what is more native advertising, and even BuzzFeed, of more internet styles of advertising. And so I think that we're in the faster horse banner ad stage of education right now, where people are upset that when they go online, say the banner ads, they flash, which makes them annoying, whereas they were stagnant on a page in a newspaper, which made them a little bit easier to avoid. And obviously, if we're trying to take something that was designed for an in-person experience and adapt it to school, it's going to be difficult. And the final thing that I will say is we've been very unfair to teachers, not on purpose, but the circumstances are unfair to teachers in terms of how fast they've had to transition. People who are good online educators who understand what it's like to play horse polo instead of water polo are people who have been doing this for years. And often the assumptions that you have in the in-person style of teaching actually hurt your ability to teach online. And so we should expect teachers to need some time to adjust. And that's not a mark on their character at all. It is, what I'm more critiquing is people who think that online education will never work because we're in that faster horse stage.
So before I took your course, your online course, Rite of Passage, where you teach modern writing, and how to become a citizen of the internet, I was under the impression that online learning was the kind of, remote virtual learning that I was just talking about, right? And all this asynchronous, courses where you just have to kind of like listen to a lecture and then go at your own pace. And, you kind of like maybe have some discussions in the forum. Right. They're like not engaging at all. Like no wonder there's such a low completion rate. And then I thought, well, what has David done? And also with Tiago, our friend Tiago Forte, who has Forte Labs, and he has this course, among others, that's called Building a Second Brain, that's designed very similar to your course. And you both do an excellent job. I've been in both courses and I've been extremely engaged, and it's just totally different from any course that I've ever been to. And what I've realized is that the reason why both of you have probably been able to do such a good job is because you guys were not teachers before. And I think that because you were not teachers before, you're not trying to push what you've always done and do it online. Like you're coming in with no
preconceived notions.
With no preconceived notions. Thank you. You read my mind. But you're just, thinking, well, what do I want to teach? What do people need? And considering it's an online audience, how do I make this engaging? How do I make this work? And you guys just designed something from scratch, again, with no things in mind of what you need to do. And I feel like that's why the course has turned out to be so successful and engaging and effective, right? So maybe something that teachers could contemplate doing is stepping back and trying to force themselves to rethink what an effective lesson would look like online, right? And again, I've been a teacher for many, many years. It's very different from what we do in person. Very, very different. So it's about pushing teachers to kind of like try to brainstorm some ideas and maybe look at what people like you and like Tiago have done. So maybe you want to talk a little bit about some of the things that you do in your course that you feel like are engaging. I know that I can come up with a bunch, especially because I'm comparing it to regular classes that are done in person. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I mean, I just remembered, so when I was at Elon, I took one class that had the flipped classroom model where you do the lectures at home and then you do the exercises in class. And it was my computer science class, and I got a D- in it. I got a D-. And I'm not even kidding. I failed the class. Oh, I just remembered. So during finals week, I slept through the final. So I raced through and I tried to code Java, and it was a disaster. I could never figure out Java the entire semester. And like, if you had put me in that situation, knowing what I knew then, I would say I would never, ever teach online. And I think that I would love to hear from you what you think we do well. I have some ideas of what we could do well, but I think in the same way that you're saying that teachers struggle to actually, like, it's the water that you swim in. So teachers don't really realize a lot of the assumptions in the same way that I don't really realize a lot of the things that we actually do in our courses.
Right. So I'm going to give you. So the first example that came to mind is exactly what you just said. So the flipped classroom approach. And I know that lots of teachers do this, which is you record like the main lecture so that people are not bored to death just, in the live session listening to you. We watch the video before we come to class, and then we have an assignment. So we come to class with an assignment that we're about to share, which is one of the first components that I think live sessions online should be for students to share something that they've created at home, right? And then, there's always opportunities for you to get instant feedback and comments. So during your class, so if you think about it, when kids are in school and the teacher's giving the lecture or the class, like you can raise your hand, they may or may not call on you, like sometimes there's no time to talk. But when you're teaching, the chat is always activated. Like I feel like the chat is always going nonstop, and it's people participating, talking about what you're talking about.
We encourage passing notes.
Right,
we encourage that.
Right. So it's like that necessity to talk while, we're learning, that's going on in the chat. Then also how you're constantly switching gears, right? So it's not like you have like all this time that you're talking. No, you present something, you talk about something that we've already seen in a video, and then we go in breakout groups, and you force us to kind of like, work through the challenges that we're having and the things that we're learning. Also the fact that it's not like you teach something and then we have to go like and just kind of like understand what you're telling us and learn that, like there's always something we need to be doing. So you're teaching modern writing, we have to be writing a blog post and publishing every single week. In building a second brain, Tiago is teaching about productivity. We all have to pick a project that we are working throughout the entire course as we're learning. So we are learning and applying our learning all the time. It's not separated. It's not like we
what is it in traditional education that prevents that from happening? Because with what you're saying, I'm struggling to find, like, okay, so with that, what is the thing that teachers then aren't doing? Why is traditional education not allowing that to happen?
Well, typically what happens when you follow a curriculum is that you have to cover the entire unit. And then at the end of the unit, there's either a test where you show what you learned, or let's say a project where you show what you learned. Right. What's a test, right? Like a test that covers all the content that we had in the unit. But what you're doing is every single day you say something and immediately we have to be incorporating it that same day in our writing. So it's not something that we're waiting until the end of the unit or at the end of the course to start applying it. We're applying what we're learning from day one. So, that constant engagement, that constant and instant feedback that we're getting, all that participation that's going on in every class, the fact that we're applying what we're learning right away. And others, I was talking to a friend who was telling me, like, she took building a second brain and she was just fascinated and completely hooked with the way that they were directing this online course. And she compared it to this other course that she was very excited that she enrolled of Yale, where it was like one of their most popular courses. And she's like, Anna, I couldn't even finish the course. Like, it was pre-recorded videos, like there was no interaction. I just did not have the motivation to just do it on my own. Like I just couldn't finish. And she's like, and I couldn't wait to join the Building a Second Brain sessions because she knew that she was going to be called on, that she was going to have to present something, that she was going to put into breakout groups, that she was going to be learning something that she was going to apply that same day. So one of the big things that you guys do right also is the incentives. Like, how are people motivated? So like with this courses, because you guys use incentives and kind of like this accountability aspect, but without using grades, without using tests, and without forcing people and without giving a certificate at the end. And yet people feel accountable. People feel like they want to show up to class with something to share so that they can get feedback and give feedback. So you've structured it in a way, I guess, without really noticing that you're doing all these things in ways that really work online. And I'm telling you this from, as a former student from both courses and as a former teacher of traditional education.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I remember I had a friend in college and he was 28 and the rest of us were, 20, 21, 22. And he had spent the last couple years in Afghanistan fighting for the U.S. Army. And he had some crazy stories. And I remember one time he showed me this video that he had because he was wearing a head camera and it was straight out of like a Call of Duty video game. He had on his computer videos of him in war. And we would always work together on these assignments, and he would show these things to me. But the reason that I always liked working with him was because I was kind of a slacker, but because he was older, he actually paid for college with his own money, whereas most of us either I was on a scholarship because of golf, then my parents helped me pay for college, and then there were a lot of other people who were on some kind of scholarship. And so the number of people who were actually paying for their own college was fairly limited. And likewise, I think that if Rite of Passage and Second Brain were full of people whose parents were paying for it and whose parents said, hey, this is just what you do in life, you wouldn't have the same kind of buy-in. Rite of Passage is at a cost that a lot of people save up for the course. And there's people who have been waiting and waiting and waiting for this experience. And they show up on day one and they're like, I need to make my money worth it. For many people in the course, this is the biggest thing that they will buy this year. And that creates a level of commitment and enthusiasm that is magnetic. And it is what drives a community of people who are reaching up to something bigger.
Right. I guess the teachers listening to this that are not really going to know how to apply that to their teaching in order to make their teaching online better, because parents are probably the one paying for school for kids. But I really like how you created this graph that kind of talks about the different things, the different components that are, about when you're like trying to build and run an online course effectively. And I feel like it would be really valuable if we kind of talk about those so that people start to understand how, it's not just teaching, when it comes to online learning. Like, you've detected that there are 4 different like categories. There's the education part, which obviously, it's like the teaching, the curriculum design, like understanding the student psychology, like being able to, teach actually like the art of teaching. But that's just one part. You've also detected that there's like a marketing component, right? And this is something that teachers can start to think about now that they're migrating online to make their content, like visually pleasing and try to like market their own courses, right? Then there's obviously like the business part of it, which you can like also talk about. There's a lot of like project managing involved. And then the part that I'm most interested in, and I feel like teachers could start with this section, is the part of entertainment. Because teaching and being an entertainer, really, like, those two things there's a very thin line between those two. And especially when it comes to online teaching, the educator, I mean, I don't want to say like a comedian, because that's not what I'm trying to say, but the educator has to be kind of an entertainer and tell stories in very vivid ways that are captivating in camera. The educator needs to be able to have like a video presence, right? Like practice, using your arms and this and that in ways that the kids actually want to pay attention to you. They need to use humor, right? Like, we know that if kids were not engaged in school, like, now imagine in front of a screen. Like, teachers really need to try hard. They can't go and approach them and, touch their shoulder and be like, hey, David, pay attention. Like, no, you need to just make it appealing to them. And that's something that it's so simple, and yet people don't do it, which is, it's not about drilling and like forcing kids to learn. Like, kids are not learning because they don't care, right? And if they don't care, and right now they're not motivated, it doesn't matter how much work you try to do and how much drilling and how much you want to force them, they're not going to learn. So why not try to sell the idea of learning to them and make it appealing and make it fun? We already know that they love watching, let's say, YouTube videos. Yeah. So try to look at YouTubers for ideas and inspiration to see how you can make the content more appealing, right?
Yeah, a couple points. So the first point was on what I was saying before about getting people to pay. Yeah, if you take the absolute principle, there's probably not that we can apply to childhood education. But if you take the meta principle here, it is that how do you inspire a vision of hope and optimism for a future if you work hard? And that's what we have in Rite of Passage. Rite of Passage is a beacon of hope in a cynical world. And that is what creates the drive. And one of the things that good teachers do is they show you that learning is cool, that it's worth the time and effort to know things. And for example, even with me, like, all of us, we need to constantly be reminded of that. The well of inspiration dries up very fast. And I remember a couple weeks ago, I sent you the podcast with Eric Weinstein and his son Zev, who's like 15 years old. And if you listen to that podcast and you don't want to go learn more, there is something clinically wrong with you. Like, you listen to this 15-year-old speak and you're like, this is so cool. And whether you're a high schooler or a grandparent, you would feel that way. So that's what I would say. The principle that we can apply from Rite of Passage is, how do you create that green light that makes people have that drive and ambition? Then, more pertinent to what you were saying here, was one of the things that really bothers me about this conversation and the way it's framed is, how do we what can teachers do to make their courses good for online education, as if that's the best? The way that this conversation needs to be framed is, how do we make online education so good that we can't even believe that in-person education used to be a thing? And now, I mean 100% in-person education. Like, the goal here is not to make online education as good. It is to make something that is so unbelievably better than what used to exist. So knowing that, here's what we know. I was with my friend Brett Spelker. We were in New Jersey. I was talking to his 11-year-old brother, and he knew more about history than I ever will, because he loves crash course history on YouTube, and he watches and he watches and he watches. So we already have proof that if kids find something that is well produced, that is fun, and that is funny often, they will like to learn. And so then it is about, as a teacher, we already know that as the world exists now, they enjoy that more than they enjoy listening to their teachers in the classroom. So we got to start talking about the gifts of online education. So what we have is we have high production values. We have the ability to script something. We have yesterday, I texted you, you came on to Rite of Passage, and you spoke to the class for like 10 minutes. And I said on Tuesday night, you were going to go on at 7:57. And what time did you start talking? You came on and started talking at exactly 7:57. And so my point is, we have our courses scripted to the second. And after every single lecture, we have a video and we review exactly what happened. And if there are so much as seconds that weren't entertaining, we change the curriculum. And that is a very different way of thinking. And then finally, in terms of what you brought with humor, the reason why humor works is there's nothing worse than being in an audience and not getting the joke. And so if you're in an audience and you're listening to something funny, you have to listen, because humor happens very fast and it can happen at any moment. And so when you're a comedian, you can speak and entertain people because people know that at any moment there's the potential for something funny and no one wants to be embarrassed.
Absolutely. Wow. So many good points in that, David. I love it. You were talking about the benefits of, and of online learning and the things that it gets right. And then one of the points that you and I were talking about a few days ago was like how the internet has changed this idea, like, in traditional schools, and I tweeted about this a few days ago, like there's like a hidden curriculum, and that's always been like teaching its own importance, right? In school, they teach you like the need to be taught, right? By isolating kids from like their either own curiosity and their ability and telling you, you need to come to school in order to learn. And kids believe this idea. They believe that in order for learning, whatever that means to them, given the structure, they have to be in school. But the internet has very clearly changed that, right? And some teachers perceive this as a threat, and I want to explain why it's not a threat. The teacher's role used to be to deliver knowledge and deliver facts, and they no longer need to do that because facts are just available online. But instead of seeing it like, oh, the internet, a threat and this and that, no, just saying, okay, my role has changed, right? Like the information is out there. So what's my role? Well, maybe help them, find this information, do proper research. My role is probably help them, decide what they want to do, find good problems to solve, and teach them how to use the internet responsibly. So it's not that the internet is replacing the job or the role of a teacher. It's just that it's changing it. And the more open as teachers we are to understanding that and adopting that, the better teachers we're going to be and the more effective our courses are going to be.
Yeah, with that said, there's now a lot bigger upside to be a teacher. I think that one of the things that's been hard about teachers, just the economics of teaching. There isn't a lot of leverage in teaching a classroom of 20 people compared to the kind of leverage that you get for teaching online. And this is what excites me about higher education. For example, if you take like an MBA course, is now you're going to get a lot more people who are CEOs of companies who have done and actually are on the front lines of building things. Like, one of the things that you learn as a marketer is don't go study marketing for the latest tactics. Now, for the timeless principles, absolutely go study that. Go read the greats. But for what to actually do now, you go to the people at the front. You go to the people who are optimizing Facebook ads. You go to the people who are currently building businesses. And what's great is now there's an incentive because of the reach of your ideas online for people who have just built or are building companies to also become teachers. And when you have practitioners teaching, they aren't so rooted in theory. They're much more rooted in practice. And what you find is people who spend their entire life with ideas tend to value complexity, but complex rules paralyze people, whereas practitioners tend to value simplicity and simple rules empower people.
Yeah, and then you mentioned something earlier that got me thinking, which was how, one of the things that people are complaining a lot about is that kids are spending so much time in front of the computer, and are spending so much time in front of a computer, and that, this is not good for kids. But if you think about it, like you said it about when we were talking about the minutes and the seconds, if you structure an online course correctly, it's supposed to minimize all that downtime, right? And you go straight to the point and you use that virtual time for very productive things, right? So it should open the rest of the day in order for you to learn in other ways, right? So that's not what we're seeing right now. With this remote virtual learning, what's happening is that kids are sitting down for hours in front of the computer, and they're often using programs that I used to use in my school. So it's these softwares where kids are just practicing skills, and there's like I Excel math, which is like they just put you different things in math and you're practicing. There's like freckle education for
That's
reading,
so
and
boring.
they're all it is. So the thing about this softwares is that they're not engaging. The kids are just kind of like drilling and trying to memorize things. And I feel like that's missing the point, right? Like that's not what we should be using the technology and the internet for, right? Like we should be using it to expand our horizons, to explore other things, and then to produce things with what we're learning, right? And to join communities online where you can exchange all these ideas, you can meet interesting people. So it's a very different way of seeing education, and when you think about it effectively online. So hopefully people are going to start thinking about it in this new way, and it's a lot more engaging. I guarantee that if you structure a course, that it's going to look very different from school, but kids are going to be engaged. COVID-19 just marks like an inflection point in the adoption of online learning in the right way, right?
The thing that I think makes this time so difficult is that the world still isn't quite ready for online learning. The technology still isn't quite there. Zoom is not very good for education. It's kind of just an accident of history that Zoom is as popular as it is. And Zoom is just not designed for education. It is not something that you really feel like you're there with somebody. Sitting on a Zoom meeting all day is exhausting in a way that sitting on a phone call isn't. Zoom has a kind of just mundane nature to it. Screen sharing could be so much more engaging. Curriculum isn't really embedded within Zoom. You can't submit assignments on Zoom. Breakout rooms, for example, you can only have 50 breakout rooms in a meeting. So when we have classes of more than 200 people in Write a Passage, we have to go really big breakout rooms. And so you're seeing these kinds of technological limitations that are preventing this organic transition into online education. Furthermore, in America, the states that have the least online connectivity in terms of unconnected students to the internet and are Louisiana, Kentucky, Mississippi, West Virginia, and Washington, D.C., all have more than 25% of kids who don't have access to the internet, which once again puts us in a really difficult situation where there's certain people who they get into online learning and their parents just have an extra laptop sitting at home. Oh yeah, just use the Mac downstairs. Then there's I was at a house recently with 6 computers. Then there's other households where no one is connected and you can't go learn on your phone. And so what has happened here is we have had this acceleration of online learning adoption, but the technology isn't going nearly as fast. And so what we have is it's almost like alt plates where they generally move together, but one moves fast. And now we're in like an educational earthquake. And we're saying, oh, this whole thing, not worth it. Terrible decision. When in reality, online learning is going to supplement it with in-person education. That will be better than the system that we used to have. Remember, reading scores basically flat. Math scores basically flat. The success of in-person education has stagnated. Online learning is the future, but we're in a place right now where, due to the circumstances of the world, we've had forced adoption with platforms that aren't built for it, and now we're mad that the online education system isn't working when no one is trained for it. None of the platforms work. It's like, of course it doesn't work. What do you expect? But that doesn't mean that we should be making this logical leap to this whole thing is a broken enterprise.
You just made excellent points there. I'm very glad that you clarified that, because when you and I talk about the future of online education and we're so optimistic about it, we often get, nitpickers or other people saying like, well, what do you mean? That poses an equity problem. What about all the kids in rural areas that don't have access to the internet? And this is not the kind of alternative education that you should be backing. And I'm like, well, if you think about it, the other alternative education experiments out there that are really good, let's say like the Montessori schools and the Waldorf and Reggio Emilia, like all these different, experiments are really good. The problem is that they're usually like only kids from like really privileged backgrounds can access these places, right? Like it's not true that in a rural area you have a Montessori school right there. No, but I do think that with time, just like technology is going to keep improving, especially because it's a big need, more and more places are going to have access to the internet. Like that's, if you look at the data from 2000 all the way to like 2020, it has been, advancing pretty quickly. So if I'm betting on any alternative education, practice, is on creating something in the virtual space, because eventually I feel like it's more likely that we're going to be reaching kids virtually than creating actual centers where we practice alternative education. Does that make sense? So it's a matter of, being patient, trying to see what people are doing out there that is working now with what we have now, trying to replicate as much as you can with what you have, and, keep learning with an open mind. And hopefully, this is a big opportunity for software companies and different people to come up and say, hey, we need to speed up the technology component, right? So that this can work faster.
Look, this is where the world is going. You have podcasts in your pocket. You have all of Wikipedia, which can be downloaded to your phone. You have more information in your pocket than kings in the 19th century had access to, and the vast majority of it is free. Then, instead of having to pay for buildings and electricity and all these sorts of things, you get the concentration of effort into teaching, which can reach a lot more people. And what you see when technology works is that it's deflationary. This is what is great about technology. In the 1940s, only a very small percentage of Americans had televisions. By the mid-1960s, almost everyone had access to a television. If you look at old Pan Am photos of the airline, people used to get dressed up in a suit and tie. Flying was really expensive. It was basically all first class. We even had American government, which propped up the price of an airline ticket to basically make it, which then incentivized everyone to make it needlessly nice. And that's what we have in a lot of our schools. What is going to happen now is, just like flying, which has become very affordable, and travel compared to what it was 40, 50 years ago, so affordable, has been spread out to the masses. This is what technology does when it goes well. Yes, right now there's no doubt an inequality issue, but if you really care about giving access to knowledge and ideas and brilliant people to people who are disenfranchised in some way, online education is the answer that you're looking for. I was just talking to one of my students. We spent an hour on the phone today. She's in Saudi Arabia, and the two of us are going back and forth talking about her interest in machine learning, her interest in complexity science, and she is able to, her first question to me was, what is it like spending time with all of these experts? I don't have access to these people. And I say to her, well, honestly, most of the time that I spend with experts, yeah, some of it's in person, but most of it is with a podcast in my ear. I went on a 40-minute walk last night with one of the smartest people who ran strategy for Microsoft. Brilliant guys, invested in 483 different companies. When I was introduced to him in person, he was introduced to me as the smartest person my friend has ever met. And I am able to do that just going on a walk. Everyone has access to that. We don't pay for it. Online education is the way out of inequality, even if right now it is one of the ways that it is manifesting in the world.
Wow. I think that is a great place to end our show and tell. That was just very, very interesting. I'm going to be thinking about these ideas for the entire day now. So, David, thank you so much. Another episode. Thank you, David. We will see you all next week.
I feel like I should hang this thing up.
This is the first time I see your diploma, by the way. You rarely talk about your college experience.
This is the first time I see my diploma, by the way.
actually believe that.